What's up guys, and welcome to Making a Video Game. I am here with Dan from Dragonpunk. He's the creator of Dragonpunk and the team lead over there. Thank you, Dan, for taking the time to come and talk to us today.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Dan, it kind of something I've been doing with these interviews is starting off short and simple, I guess, with the first question being, what did you grow up playing? How did you get into video games?
Well, I think I started like many people my age with Nintendo and Sega and N64, obviously. One of my inspirations was a kind of short-lived Sega channel where you could actually stream video games to your console and play it. And I don't even know if people remember it, but as far as technology goes, that was incredibly cutting edge. And it's not until recently, or actually I would say probably streaming video games is really going to take the market by storm in 2019, 2020. So we're talking, what, 25, almost 30 years ahead of its time. So that was certainly an inspiration to me.
I gotta say, I had a Sega Genesis, and I don't even remember the ability to do that.
Right. I don't know what happened, or I don't know why it didn't take off, but you could, through your cable network, download video games to your Sega and then play them. And it was like they would change them up like monthly. Sounds like no big deal now, but again, about doing that 25 years ago, that was impressive.
How did you start modding, or how did you start messing with, the intricacies of video games like codes and like visual arts and stuff like that? When did that come about?
Another good question. So I have a 4-year degree in video game development from University of Texas at Dallas. Unfortunately, and you'll see this in a lot of industries, to get an entry-level job, you have to have 3 to 4 years of experience. And no one's been able to figure out exactly how that's supposed to work. Some people will say interns, but in the video game industry, it's really modding. They want to see, a 4-year degree plus modding experience. In a perfect world, you're going to get a job with the actual company you've modded, CD Projekt Red, which is a big fan of their work, Witcher, Cyberpunk. They'll hire modders. Of course, Studio Wildcard is great about hiring their modders as well. And so just from a purely business perspective, that's kind of the reason to start. Now, from a passion perspective, obviously, modding is a great place to start, because if you want to make your own game, that can take a huge team, millions of dollars. It's hard to know where to start, even if you're just trying to code it on your own. But I feel like modding helps people who are learning take bite-sized chunks or smaller projects that they can get a great sense of accomplishment from.
Right, and it helps build your portfolio also to show, developers what you've done and stuff like that.
It's very true.
Did you guys start with XCOM? Because I've heard you guys that you did some XCOM stuff before you guys started doing Ark stuff. Is that right?
Correct. We are the creators of the XCOM 2 co-op mod, along with many other mods and Dragonpunk specific mods for XCOM. And that's another long story. We got a cease and desist, even though we were working directly with developers at Firaxis. And it turns out that someone had misreported us to 2K Games, which is their parent company, and thought we were like doing our own illegal Kickstarter without permission. And we did get a letter of apology later, a little too late, like a year later. And at that point, we had already started moving to Ark, and we were very happy. Studio Wildcard has been incredibly supportive. The Ark community, the players have been very welcoming, and we just found a home here, so we decided to continue.
How far along in the process were you before you got that cease and desist?
Well, we had, again, finished the entire co-op mod, and you can see those videos on our YouTube. We hadn't created a full total conversion, and that is our goal. To back up just a little bit, is to create a full Dragonpunk total conversion. The way that goal came to be is I actually had just wanted to make a Shadowrun mod for XCOM 2 to honor my father, who had passed away. And it was just going to be a little thing in my mind. It was little, as I come to understand the video game world better. It's certainly realized the scope of it all. But it wasn't going to be too long. It was going to be maybe a year or two process, something to show that I could do it. Shadowrun was a very big game to my father, something to honor him, and then go back to working my normal job.
Okay, so has this been a part-time thing in addition to your normal 8-to-5 job or your day job?
Yes, and I can say that for everybody on the team. Everyone works, 1 to 2 normal jobs, as is unfortunately typical in the United States. Plus, they're working 40 hours a week modding. And we are now sponsored by Studio Wildcard, which is great. It's very generous. But when you divide that over, say, 15 to 20 developers, that ends up being about $200 a month, which is, just enough to keep you buying like a new monitor or a new hard drive. Again, incredibly generous, but you're not going to get rich modding, certainly.
I did an interview with Tripwire Interactive, and what's awesome about their story is they were able to take a mod that they started. They won the NVIDIA's Make Something Unreal contest, and they were able to take that opportunity and create a full game off of the mod that they created. And so that was another reason, I guess, I was super excited to talk to you guys. And you kind of answered my question. One of my later questions I was going to ask you is, I know a lot of people who start modding are doing this to try to get their foot in the door in the gaming industry, to get on with a developer, and then others are trying to turn their modding team into an actual development company itself. And I think you kind of answered my question, is this is your way to get your foot in the door, because you need experience, but it's hard to get experience if no one will give you a chance, and I've heard that several times before.
And I'd certainly love to make Dragonpunk its own game. It is hard though. I would say Tripwire's experience is what we call the exception and not the rule. It's hard for video game startups. So most startups in general in any industry fail. Video games especially, it's hard to get that initial funding because there is so much risk. What we're trying to show the industry is that mods actually mitigate risk. And you can see that from everything like, Dota to League of Legends, is that a lot of big name gaming companies start as mods, yet somehow it's not streamlined. Somehow the industry doesn't realize that, well, maybe let's invest $300,000 in making just a really incredible mod instead of waiting 4 years and $10 million just to have a game. I can think of 2 games that came out in the last year that were multi-million productions that did not do well. So maybe they started as a mod that could have mitigated risk.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Let me circle back to something that we kind of blew over pretty fast there, and that is that Dragonpunk, you guys are now sponsored by Wildcard. Now, is that sponsorship kind of like, hey, here's some money to keep you guys going to make whatever you guys feel like for mods? Or is that more like they're sponsoring you guys to have you guys help them on specific aspects of the actual game?
Oh, I would love if it was the latter. And I think it would actually be a third choice. So we're going to be modding Ark no matter what. In fact, our sponsorship ends on March. And we already have content planned well into winter of 2019 and I guess early 2020. So it's not necessarily to keep anyone modding. I think it would be more as a reward for those who are modding and who are really going above and beyond. And I caveat that with there's a lot of people who are going above and beyond who are not sponsored. So I don't want to say that if you're not sponsored, you're not going above and beyond. I certainly don't want to say that. There's unfortunately limited spots, so they're trying to do the best they can with the budget they have. I think a lot of people do forget that Studio Wildcard is indie dev and doesn't have a multi-billion dollar company behind them. So, but it's been an incredible opportunity. So
as I look on Steam right now, I see that you guys have 4 mods for Ark already out there that you can download right now, right? Is there more? Am I missing any, or is 4? Is this the right number I'm seeing right here?
Right. So the Fomorian and the Leviathan mods are coming out soon. They were available to our Season 2 players. We do have role-playing seasons to kind of help troubleshoot and provide content to our more passionate players. So those will be coming out soon. And I guess the one thing I will say about our mods are we prefer to have bigger mods, or we call them mega mods. So yes, there are 4, but they're not just like 1 or 2 lines of code. They're many of them have like $10,000 plus worth of assets, art assets, or coding in them. So basically what we do with our mods is we create subsystems. So we're creating each subsystem in a game, 1 mod at a time.
So that helps me with my next question. I didn't want to make it seem like you only have 4 mods out, but like some of these are total conversions of the game, right? And I was just wondering if maybe you could explain to some people what's the difference between like a normal mod where you get like, oh, here's a cool new dinosaur, and then an actual total conversion of a game.
I think to answer your question, to be in terms of scope again. So let's go back to our goal as Dragonpunk, which was to create a AAA Shadowrun total conversion. And for those who aren't familiar with Shadowrun, it's essentially Magic meets Cyberpunk. And for Tribe of Gods, which is our Ark total conversion, it's actually the backstory of how did we get into a world where Magic meets Cyberpunk. Now, to make that happen, so we have to have a full Magic mod. And that's just not 1 or 2 spells. That's the virtual effects, that's the items, whether it's wands or whether it's other items that you can sell in the auction house. So in and of itself, you could say that Magic mod is a full total conversion. I would personally define total conversion as something that could honestly be its own standalone game with more development or taken to the next level. I mean, I don't think any modder is going to inherently make its own standalone game just because those cost tens of millions of dollars. But you can, just like Tripwire, you can create the core of what would be a standalone game, demo that to someone else, and then expand upon it. And to me, that is the definition of a total conversion: is something that is unique enough, a mod that is unique enough that could be taken and expanded upon to be its own game.
So quite naturally, you can understand that, doing something like that is quite the undertaking. How many people do you have working with your team right now?
We have 20 developers that are core developers and about 40 total contributors to these Ark mods. And it does take a team, and that's still people doing 2 to 3 disciplines, where in a full studio, you might have someone who is just doing animation or someone who's just doing rigging, whereas Miss Ikaria is doing both rigging and animation. So you're working along multiple disciplines, whereas I'm, say, creative director and a game programmer, where that might be 2 different jobs as well in a full studio. So, we still, it takes a lot of people even to make mods these days.
Like you said before, you're thinking about 40 hours a week for working on the mods, and that's in addition to your 40-hour-a-week job, at least. What is a normal day if you have to come home and you have to get after it on something Dragonpunk is working on? What does that day look like for you?
So I think many of our modders sleep about 2 hours a day. I actually get about 4 hours of sleep a day, which is probably more than I should, especially as the lead. But for me, if I get less than 4 hours of sleep, I'm making poor decisions and essentially making more work for the rest of the team. And, that's the passion that you're going to see. And even at a studio level, I see a lot of gamers. And, I did this too when I was just getting in and didn't understand all the hard work. I see a lot of people saying that maybe this studio or that studio, they're lazy. And the reality is that games are so hard and are so complex now. We're literally pushing the human potential to be able to make bigger and better games. People are working, they have no free time, they're not getting paid much, they're getting 2 to 4 hours of sleep per day. So it's not that developers are lazy, it's that we're literally pushing ourselves to the limit of what is humanly possible. And I certainly think with modders, that's doubly so, because we're working 40-hour per week jobs just for the opportunity to make these free mods.
Right, and you can definitely tell that you guys have to have a passion for it too. I mean, right now you said you guys are getting sponsored and you're making about $200 a month based off of the sponsorship. And before, you guys didn't even have that, right? So, I mean, you know, even with the sponsorship, 160 hours a month is a lot of hours for only $200.
Yeah, we are incredibly grateful to Studio Wildcard, and we will never absolutely look down at this generous stipend. But yeah, when you look at the fact that it's taken 2 to 3 years of modding for free just to get to the point to be considered to be sponsored, plus you have to divide $4,000 per month over 20 core developers, yeah, you're definitely not doing it for the money, certainly.
All right, now I have to ask this question. I saw months and months and months ago that you guys were working on this huge flying creature called the Leviathan. And then all of a sudden, in Extinction, there's a creature that looks very similar to the Leviathan called the Desert Titan. And if you look at them side by side, they look very similar. Now, is this just a coincidence? Or do you think Studio Wildcard saw something that they liked that you guys were working on and decided to implement that in the game?
I do believe that in this particular case, it is a coincidence. However, there is a bigger theme there that modders are a way to reduce risk for new elements in bigger games. And I think that's essentially fair, especially when you're sponsored, because we should justify our value. And our value is not just making new content for players, but if we're getting $4,000 a month, we should provide a $4,000 per month value to both the players and Studio Wildcard. And if that's by introducing a concept like Titans and showing them that players are really excited about that, and that justifies our value, then that's fine. That's business.
Right, and if something like that was to happen, it also pays a compliment to you guys too.
Sure. And, the thing is, I'd actually like to encourage that. So instead of, I post a lot on Twitter and I didn't say, oh, they're stealing our idea. In fact, I try to encourage it, because if we can encourage other game studios to sponsor their modder as well by showing, the value of modding, then that's what we want to see. We want to create what we call mods as the middle class, because given that video games is a blockbuster-driven industry, and you always have to spend more money to make bigger games, and actually, and people will say that, oh, well, what about this indie dev or that indie dev? But there's probably only about 5 to 10 indie devs that you could name for the thousands upon hundreds of thousands of indie devs that are out there. So it definitely is a blockbuster-driven industry. And if we can convince other game studios to follow the path that Studio Wildcard took by sponsoring their modders, then we can generate, not only an entirely new middle class, but, an established way for people to get into industry. And it's just not there right now.
You kind of mentioned your Dragonpunk seasons, your RPG seasons, and how they were kind of a way to test out some of the things you guys were working on. Can you kind of explain what those seasons are? Because I remember seeing that before, and you guys, it was open for a period of time to sign up and to jump on there to help with that. And I just didn't quite understand what it was, the RPG aspect of it. I didn't understand if they were going to be given roles and then they have to play out a specific character, or how exactly that worked.
So in terms specifically for Ark, Ark is certainly not an RPG type game, but since it is a sandbox and you can do or be pretty much whatever you want to be, a lot of communities have embraced Ark for role playing, and certainly not just Dragonpunk. We were not even the first, to tell you the truth. Now, if you combine the fact or the idea of role playing with the idea of seasons in Ark, because what we've noticed as we hosted servers is there's a natural cycle to Ark. You get really excited about the map, the mod list, you play for about 2 to 3 months, And then, you start to get burned out a little bit and play some other games and then come back to Ark. It's this, and potentially you could even say there's a cyclical nature in any video game that you love. You play it, you get excited about new content, and then get a burnout, play some other games, and then come back as new content is available. So, and you see that in a lot of games now that they're embracing that cyclical nature and hosting seasons. And so that's what we want to do. We wanted to, and not assign characters, and in fact, actually have people create their character and be whoever they want to be, join the servers. And this, in fact, was a cluster. It was essentially a full MMO type cluster of all the most popular Ark maps. And then have custom content for people to get excited, but also to test. And then there's another aspect of that I would touch on, is that when we started Ark, we pitched this to Studio Wildcard actually back in April 2017 now. I can't believe it's almost 2 years. We wanted to create the storyline or the backstory for Dragonpunk, which is, again, how did this world come to happen? So we actually established a deal where any content or any stories made by the characters could be used in any official Dragonpunk game. The catch just being, we can't say anything about like obelisks, or we can't use the actual word Ark. Anything that's illegal content from Ark has to stay with Ark. And should we be able to make a Dragonpunk game in the future, all the stories, all the characters, everything that happened during these seasons, like season 2 just concluded, so everything that just happened can become official Dragonpunk backstory. And we've actually hired, or actually we're in the process of picking the last 3. We're hiring a professional writer to go ahead and write this down. This will be essentially free fan fiction, but it will be professional quality fan fiction. And that will be the backstory of, and anytime you play a Dragonpunk game and you read about the characters who made the world and lore, you're not just reading something that we made up. You're reading actual player deeds and actual players who've really invested in the character they made.
Did you have the people who are playing these characters make notes, or do you just have like a record of like gameplay of what happened and what transpired?
That's a very good question. In fact, so we had 3 different Discord channels, and it got a little confusing for people, but we had places where people could post 1, their original character story, 2, their stories, ongoing stories and pictures of what they were doing throughout the season, and 3, their kind of final stories with their story arc. And so we're putting that together along with Twitch footage, YouTube footage, etc., to create a picture for the author to come in and draft the full novel. It may in fact be bigger than a novel. That's something we're trying to work out the logistics of right now. But you're asking a really good question. There was no possible way for us to be able to record all the gameplay footage from each players, but communicating what this was and what our intent was. The players were able to do it themselves, and we tried to be equally focused on everyone, not pick favorites, and show the epic stories. Unfortunately, we can't talk about every single detail of every character, but we can equally communicate all of the epic stories into one novel.
It sounds like quite a task that this author has on their hands.
Well, it beats having to pick it up. They're never going to suffer from writer's block. How about that?
Yeah, that's true. They'll have a lot of info.
They will not lack for content. That's for sure.
So when did Dragonpunk start officially?
My father was fatally shot late April. I had just started my own company. I was a cloud architect in Washington, D.C. in the defense industry, because I was also 11 years Army. It was just kind of a natural thing. You graduate from the Army to the defense industry. And when my father was fatally shot, and the company was registered, actually 2 weeks later, I had done it just right before he was taken from me. I decided to change it. It was supposed to be a cloud architecture company for, I can say this now, for the CIA. We had already had our first contract, and him being a huge Shadowrun fan, and him also always encouraging me to follow my passion for game development, I decided to, go ahead and take this company that had just started and to actually turn it into a video game company. And so that's surprisingly not uncommon. You've probably heard of this company, BioWare. The reason BioWare's name BioWare is they were going to be a medical software company, and randomly decided to make one of the greatest, games of all times. Regardless of how you feel of BioWare as a company now, the original BioWare, they were just like a bunch of software guys for a medical company. Like, oh, let's make a really amazing video game. So that's how we started. So we have been an official company, actually, even though kind of working for free, since May 18th, 2015.
And when you started, was it just you by yourself, or were you able to get a couple of people to jump on board right away?
Well, it always starts with you, but we have some long-term members like Alad Devesh, who's been with us for 3 years. He is just an absolutely brilliant Israeli developer. He is right now, like about 2 weeks ago, started serving his compulsory military duty. But yeah, he's even talking about like, hey, I want to mod on the weekends. And we're like, lad, it's okay. Do your thing, man. And once you start contributing for Dragonpunk, I guess, hopefully, I'd like to think that there's such a team spirit that a lot of people don't want to leave. And real life happens. Our motto is real life comes first. And some people have had to drop out because of, family and having a baby. And we're like, no, your baby is more important than video games. It's okay. It really is.
Okay, let's take Dragonpunk, for instance. You have 20 core modders, you said, right? And you guys are now sponsored by Studio Wildcard. We've mentioned that before. Obviously, they like what you guys are doing. If Studio Wildcard needed to fill some slots on their development team, would they come looking at you guys for that? Would they be like, hey, oh man, I want this person from the Dragonpunk animation team? Or is it more on a per person basis? Or is it more like, I want everyone who worked on this element that Dragonpunk has produced?
It usually is on a per person basis. And that's, if you talk about employee turnover, which is an issue that every company has to worry about. That's certainly an issue that we have to worry about. We've lost our best level designer. We've lost our best creature designer to Studio Wildcard, and it's great to be able to say that because it builds, networks. Now I have people who are on Team Dragonpunk who are at Studio Wildcard and can say, hopefully someday, what about that Dan Connery guy?
Right.
But yeah, it's certainly a stepping stone. And this has always been our foundation, though. Like, modding is a stepping stone into the industry.
Right.
And we haven't forgot who we are. At no point am I going to tell anybody who is contributing to Dragonpunk, like, oh no, please don't take that AAA job
right.
at the studio over there. I'm not going to do that. Yeah, I just tell them to remember their friends back at Dragonpunk, if there's ever an open opportunity for anybody else. And I think it's great. Like, and on the flip side of that, we've had people who've gone on to do great things at Guerrilla Games or even Bethesda has come back and mentored the current modders. So, they've gone a full cycle where they've made it and they've come back to help and contribute to help others make it.
That's awesome.
So I think it's been really, really incredible in that respect.
Has anyone thought about possibly making a game of their own instead of modding? Like, just kind of like a side project type of thing, maybe a side scroller or something that's a little bit, maybe a little bit easier to do.
Oh, certainly people have it. Everybody on Team Dragonpunk is certainly welcome to work. There's no non-compete agreement that you have to sign. I know everybody's got their own personal projects in the works. And again, this goes back to the games being a blockbuster-driven industry, though, where it would be great if, teams of 1 to 5 people could make their own game and make enough money to keep going, and potentially, or maybe even make a bigger game. And it used to be like that. And a lot of people still think that it is, because the games industry has grown so fast that a lot of the mentality is that we're still in the 90s, where you could make a game with a group of your friends in a garage, instead of realizing that it can take 100 to 200 people 4 years to make a game now. And even though there is an indie dev market, and I don't want to discount that, even indie devs find that it's very, very hard to make money. In fact, it's oversaturated on Steam, which is why we wanted, again, to promote modding, especially if there was ever a point where people could actually make enough modding to get rich. And I'm not saying that mods shouldn't be free. I'm not going to go into that. But what if studios like Studio Wildcard saw that there was enough value in modding to promote individuals or even teams, and we could actually create the next generation of content that way, instead of all trying to pitch our indie game on Steam in an already oversaturated market.
Right, I totally agree. And I know myself personally, I wouldn't mind throwing a few bucks towards a moderator, towards a mod that either a moderator that has established themselves to be of quality, or a mod that I just think is really cool and I want to try it out. And I know it's got to be very tough to stay motivated to be a modder that makes little to no money.
It is. And actually, on top of that, I have invested over $150,000 of my own money over the last 3 years as well. And a lot of that goes to certainly some developer time, but there's a lot of taxes, legal paperwork, things that you have to do, where I can't necessarily justify spending our sponsorship money on that. Like, I need to be able to go to Studio Wildcard and say, you gave me $4,000 for this month. Here's $4,000 worth of mod content, hopefully more, but here's $4,000 worth of content that you got. And I can't say, well, I spent your stipend this month on us filing our taxes. I can't.
Right. No, that totally makes sense. Dragonpunk started off with XCOM. It didn't really turn out the way you wanted. And then it moved over to Ark. Now, those are two totally different games. And some people may not know exactly what style XCOM is versus Ark on my channel. But like, XCOM is more of a turn-based, and Ark is obviously, well, first and third person. You can go in either one there. What are the challenges between two completely different games?
That is another really great question that no one's asked me before. And the only reason this works at all is because Dragonpunk is really like think of it like a Marvel Cinematic Universe type of thing, where it's magic meets cyberpunk, and anything can happen. We have our recurring characters, but it's not necessarily tied down to specific game mechanics. Magic can be in a turn-based game, or it could be in Ark, which is essentially first or third person open world game. And so the game mechanic themselves might differ, but it's still a subsystem. And there has been some redundancy that we've had to have magic for XCOM, or in completely different code, which is magic for Ark, which does hurt or does set us back a bit when making our a full game. If we do get to make a full Dragonpunk game, I'm not even sure it would necessarily be a survival game. We are big fans of the game Warframe, where there's a combination of procedurally generated content plus open world. And if we had the opportunity to make Dragonpunk, we'd actually perhaps even like to follow that kind of a model, where it's free to play but not pay to win, with some procedurally generated contents, maybe like the Cyberpunk city being procedurally generated, with some custom level design like we're doing with Ark. So since this is a universe and not necessarily tied to game mechanics, we're actually able to get away with modding for different games, or even in the future having different game mechanics than we see in Ark. We've actually been talking with CD Projekt Red for the last 3 years regarding modding Cyberpunk 2077, which is very much a different game from either XCOM 2 or from Ark. But since it is, again, Cyberpunk, we can add things like a magic subsystem, metaphysical races, whatnot to a game like that. Again, assuming that we have the tools to do so, which, if you know anything about CD Projekt Red, they started out as modders for Neverwinter Nights, and most of the games have been moddable. Witcher 3 actually was a rare exception that wasn't that moddable, but we're really hoping for a big mod kit for Cyberpunk 2077, because that could be the future of Dragonpunk. Now, that would not be at the expense of our Ark mods. That would be essentially after Ark, so starting in 2020. But again, that goes back to the fact that Dragonpunk is more of a universe than any inherent game mechanics.
Oh yeah, I can definitely see Dragonpunk translating over to Cyberpunk, because the Arena of Gods mod that you guys have out, you guys, in that trailer for Arena of Gods, man, there's depicted a cyberpunk looking city with the neon lights that just looks amazing. And I think actually that's one of the first things that actually drew me towards Dragonpunk.
All right, and that content is coming out. So we have Season 3, which we're looking at about somewhere between the March to May timeframe coming out, and that will have the new custom map Tier to Nog. And that Cyberpunk map, along with Cyberpunk building set, is scheduled for sometime winter in 2019. And again, that will be past when our sponsorship ends, but you don't become a modder for the money. We're going to keep creating great content. And then, so after that, probably again, early 2020, we'll decide, if there's Ark, or maybe if there's Ark 2, or if there's not, should we go to Cyberpunk 2077 and essentially try to turn that into Magic versus Cyberpunk? So we will see.
And if you could, what was the date that you said that Leviathan was coming back out, or the Leviathan's going to be dropping?
I didn't say. That's a good question. We're about to make that public, but in a beta testing phase. We've mentioned on our Twitter that the only issue we're having with it right now is that there was a hard-coded render distance option on the servers. It's not on single player, it's not on non-dedicated servers, but for your dedicated multiplayer servers, it will de-render if you get too far away from it. And that's why we hadn't released it already.
Oh, yeah. I noticed that happens with a lot of dinosaurs on Ark, but something that big, I can definitely see why you guys would.
And see, that's the thing. It's when I say get too far away, I mean if you get more than a couple steps away, just because it's so big, it can de-render. And again, not on single player, so you could use it right now on single player and it'd be fine. And that is one of the inherent downfalls of being a modder, is that you kind of don't know what you can change. Like, there's so much that you can change in Ark. They actually provide essentially a customized Unreal Engine 4 that you can use and have fun and essentially make a whole new game like Dragonpunk. But there are a few hard-coded options that you don't even realize are hard-coded until you make a really big Leviathan-type creature and then spend another 2 months like, wait, why is this happening? And then you find out, oh, this was hard-coded and I can't change that. But that's part of modding, and that's part of learning the engine.
You have 4 mods available on Steam right now, and obviously Steam is for PC only, so those mods only work for Ark on PC. And typically when you see YouTubers and Twitch streamers play some of these mods for different games, not necessarily Ark, but in general, a very common question is, when are these mods coming to console? Or why can't these mods ever be on console? That's all I have, blah blah blah. And I kind of already know the answer, and the answer is partially because Microsoft and Sony have a close grip fist around what is released on their console. But my question would be, why is it easier to write a mod for PC? Why is it easier to develop a mod for PC over consoles?
It's not just that they Xbox or Sony are interested in type of content, there's a certification process in getting any content, game or mods, to a console, and it's pretty lengthy and it's pretty costly too. So it's not just that we can upload our mod content, and that's something Bethesda, to their credit, has been working very hard and spends tens of millions of dollars on, is to try a platform to try to streamline that. But as it stands, it's manually approved, and that actually goes back. This is how old I am, and I've taken classes in the technology of video games. I think it goes back to the Nintendo and pre-Nintendo days, when there wasn't any kind of certification process and anybody could just pump out any kind of content. There was no quality control. It was a completely oversaturated market. And in some respects, it's very similar to what Steam is right now, where you can just make something, doesn't even matter if it works, put it up there and hope somebody buys it. So there is a good reason to have that certification process. However, it does make it difficult for modders or people who can't, afford to go through that process to push their content. It's certainly not Studio Wildcard being lazy. I've talked to them, and all the great content they have, they'd love for it to be on consoles, but there are business realities where it costs money, both internally and to Sony or Microsoft, to get it there. So they have to pick and choose, unfortunately, out of all the great content, what's going to go and in what time frame.
Right. And I've even heard that the certification process just to be able to roll out an update for a game is between $5,000 or $10,000 for Microsoft. So, I mean, honestly, if you think about it, those updates aren't bringing in any more money.
And that's what you got to think about. Servers aren't bringing any more money because servers are free. Updates aren't bringing in any more money. It's very costly to support it. It's costly, one, to make a game, but it's very costly to keep supporting a game, especially years later. DLC sales certainly help, but that's why a lot of video game companies are switching more to a live ops model, where if they can sell skins, let's take Fortnite. I try to not ever mention Fortnite if I can get away with it, but let's take Fortnite. They have made, essentially, it's a free-to-play game. They have made $85 per person. So if a normal game would be $60, they have had, per person, made $85 per person. Now, obviously, we all know about whaling, so a lot of people are not paying, and that there's certain people who are paying upwards of $500. But I actually will go ahead and say I respect Fortnite for being for staying away from a pay-to-win model. It has been mostly cosmetics. They're pretty much on the up and up, and I think a lot of people can respect that. And that helps, again, so not to get off topic, sorry, but that helps to pay for updates, pay for servers when you're not directly charging. Whereas back 10 years ago, you would have more MMOs that can charge a monthly server subscription fee that could pay for all that. Unfortunately, I know only a handful of games that can still justify it. WoW, Final Fantasy 14. Very few players are willing to pay that monthly subscription fee, even if it means great content, great updates. Games are so competitive. I don't know if you've seen the latest mobile ads. There's a certain mobile ad or a certain mobile game that came out that has Ryan Reynolds, and they paid him $100 million. $100 million.
Toon Blast.
Yes. And I guarantee you that game did not even cost $100 million to make. And that's where we are and how competitive the industry is right now, where you're spending $100 million for advertising on a game that costs maybe $2 to $3 million to make.
Right.
So, and that's just part of a blockbuster-driven industry, is that there's more games than there really are player hours.
That's a big gamble, though. I mean,
yeah, that is.
Because if you don't get your money back from that, your company's gone.
And that goes back to risk, and hopefully why mods can be of value to bigger games. Whereas, let's say I have $100,000. Basically what I did, I had $100,000. I was like, well, I can try to make an indie game and then not even have any kind of advertising budget. Or what if I spend $100,000 on making free mods, get the Dragonpunk name out there, just have people heard it and be like, hey, I remember hearing that name Dragonpunk. Okay, I played one of their mods once, was it cool? So what is the best expenditure of $100,000? Is it advertising, which the $100,000 is essentially nothing in advertising? Or would it be best to make small content like free mod, just sticking your name out there and have that be advertising?
Okay, so speaking of advertising, that actually brings me to a question that I've asked before, and that is, have you noticed or have you gotten any, advertising from streamers playing your mods or from YouTubers picking it up and playing your mods? Obviously some of them have some pretty big communities and they'd be interested in playing what their favorite content creator is playing.
Oh, absolutely. We're incredibly grateful because from a business perspective, if you're like a full game, your average one video for a popular streamer or YouTuber could cost $5,000 to $20,000. And we've had several content creators cover Dragonpunk, and we do not take that for granted. Every time I see, a video talking us up, telling people to go join our Season 2 server, which we got so many players from Every Night Riot, I'm like, that's $5,000 that we didn't have, that's of our non-existent promotional budget. So as far as I see it, we've gotten close to another $50,000 to $100,000 worth of free advertising just because of the generosity of streamers covering Dragonpunk, and I do not take that for granted.
I know personally, when I started playing your mods, it was at a point in time where Ark for me was getting stale and mundane, and things just felt kind of monotonous and I wasn't having fun with it anymore. But then I started playing some of your mods, started messing around with the Magic Nexus, started messing around with the mythical creatures and the PvE overhaul where you can kill dinosaurs and get their ascendant hide to create ascendant gear and stuff like that. Just all those things. It gave a breath of new life into Ark and made it fun again for me.
Oh, that's fantastic to hear. Yeah, that's exactly what mods are supposed to do to prolong the life or longevity of a game. And let's obviously talk about Skyrim. They have made their money really from mods, extending the life of Skyrim so they can report it to all the different consoles. So it's a win-win for everyone. And that's what we're hoping to see. We're hoping for more gaming studios to realize that, it's just not possible to create enough content on your own to be competitive in this kind of market anymore. So why not sponsor a few modders for whatever game you have, and let's grow that middle market as mod developers.
All right, Dan. So one question that I usually like to end with is, if there's somebody listening that wants to become a game developer, wants to kind of follow in your footsteps, would you tell them to go down the same path that you did, which is, go to college, get your degree, and then start making mods and, turn that into a portfolio that you can then use to try to get a game development job?
Absolutely, but I would tell them to do it a lot sooner than I did. I really essentially started modding after college, because for me, I had military obligation myself because I did ROTC. And so I didn't really start modding until not only after my military obligation, but then when I was already established in the defense industry. I would recommend people start modding at least their sophomore year of college. Maybe enjoy your freshman year, understand academia, but sophomore to junior year, definitely start hardcore modding. Any time that you're going to spend playing video games is time you could be making video games. And the industry is just too competitive, and that's a bigger theme that we're starting to see it now, is people who play video games are not necessarily the people who make video games, and there's some disparity between there that is causing concern in the industry. And I'm not going to go into that, but one of the reasons that's happening is not just because of political ideologies, but also because it takes so much time to learn to make video games that you actually have to force yourself to play video games. I have to force myself to play Red Dead Redemption 2, which is crazy. It's an amazing game. And there's a lot of times I don't even get to play video game. I have to watch it on YouTube, like the cutscenes, or I might have to go on Twitch to understand any specific game mechanic. And it's unfortunate, but it's just such a competitive industry. There's still a lot of jobs. I would recommend it, but it's so competitive and so time consuming that you have to budget your time wisely.
Well, Dan, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today. I love this kind of stuff, and I love getting the personal side behind some of the people that make some of my favorite things, and I just think it's so awesome. So once again, thank you everyone. This was Dan from Dragonpunk, the creator and team lead over there at Dragonpunk, making some of the awesome stuff for the game you love, Ark Survival Evolved. And I will see you guys next time.
Thank you, and see you in Season 3.